YouTube gamers, Bonfire here, and today I want to talk about Recore, the newest Xbox One exclusive game that just dropped this past week. I've been playing a ton of it over the past weekend, and so I want to take a moment to share my impressions of the game thus far. So for those of you that don't know, what is Recore? Recore is a third-person shooter slash platforming game in which you've come across this mysterious planet, Far Eden, and you've awoken, and your whole goal with this planet was to terraform the planet, awaken, and kind of civilize this planet. Think along the lines of what Interstellar was, because Earth is no longer livable. Humans had to go find a new planet to live on. Therefore, we found Far Eden, but something's gone wrong, because Jewel, the main protagonist, the girl in the game, is the only human, and she's surrounded by all these robots that were supposed to be doing all this work for her. Something's gone wrong, and so you got to figure out what the heck happened. And with all that said, let's start with some of the things I like about this game. First and foremost, this game feels like a PlayStation 2 era game. With the platforming and the shooting that I'd mentioned previously, it feels like a game that belongs in the PlayStation 2 era. And for me, I like that because it's kind of a breath of fresh air with so many serious games and first-person shooters that have come out. It's nice to see this type of game, and to me, they're a lot of fun. And that leads me to the gameplay. And the gameplay is something that I really like. And I talked about this in my PAX vlogs after I tried it over at PAX West. But the gameplay consists primarily of shooting and platforming, and the shooting is just really fun. It's very arcade-like. You lock onto your enemy, and you can kind of strafe around, and it's very simplistic, but it adds a level of complexity when you're having to move around and kind of dodge multiple enemies and try to stay alive, all while shooting and trying to take down these enemies. I find it really enjoyable. On top of the shooting, there are also different ammo types that you have that are different colors. So you start out with your white, then you get blue, red, and yellow ammo types, and you have to change your ammo types based on the enemies and match the colors up because the enemies will be different colors. So add that with the movement system and locking on. I just feel like it's a lot of fun and kind of keeps things spicy, but not too spicy. It's not overly complicated. It's actually very simplistic. Some might say too simplistic, but I still think it's really enjoyable. Now, I have mentioned platforming, and platforming is another thing that this game does really, really well. Throughout the game, you'll do a ton of platforming, some actually very challenging platforming in certain areas and dungeons and things like that as you go through the levels. But it's really good. And again, with that PS2 era style of gameplay, that third-person platforming, it's just really fun, and I think it's done very well. Another piece of the gameplay that I really like outside of the shooting and the platforming is that you can upgrade your core bots. So your core bots, as you've probably seen in all the trailers and promotions for this game, are your robot companions. And so as you go through the game, you'll collect different cores, different blueprints, and different pieces of scrap metal that you can use to upgrade your companions. And so by upgrading your companions, you'll increase their attack, defense, they'll look a little bit different, and it's just a really fun aspect. Kind of changes things up from, the shooting and the platforming and gives you something to strive for in a way that a lot of loot-based games do. Now, I'm not saying this is a loot-based game, but kind of has that loot aspect of it when you're upgrading and finding these items for your core bots. Moving on from the gameplay is the story. And for the most part, I like what I've seen of the story. At the beginning of the game, it does an okay job, not the best job, of kind of introducing you to these characters in this world and kind of what's going on. But there's enough elements there that kind of keep me asking questions, and I definitely want to know the answers to those questions, so it's just enough to keep you interested. However, as I'm reaching the latter parts of the game, and I'm about 7 hours or so into this game, and I know I've heard you can beat the game between 8 to 10 hours, so I know I'm towards the tail end of it. The story elements aren't as apparent or interesting, but I'm hoping that there's a good conclusion to it. The last element of the game that I'm really enjoying are the dungeons. So in this game, there are dungeons that you'll come across and find that'll have treasures and different items to explore and find. And this game is kind of an open world game. It's not really a traditional open world game, and it doesn't really have traditional Metroidvania elements. It's kind of a combination in the lightest sense possible. Hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. But these dungeons are really fun, and they're scattered throughout the world. They offer you some pretty cool items and some challenges. And these dungeons, they're quick, they're easy, they're fun, and it's really enjoyable finding loot. So as you do these challenges, whether it be, you know, fighting a certain amount of enemies or going through a pretty difficult platforming section, you'll get different items at the end of it. And some of these items you need to progress through the game. Other items are just fun, like blueprints, so you can upgrade your core bots and stuff like that. But I just think they're really enjoyable, and I think they're very well made. Now let's move on to some of the things that I dislike about this game. First and foremost, and this is probably my biggest gripe with the game, is that there's this extracting mechanic where you will actually extract the cores from your enemies after you get their life down to a certain point. And when you do this, you enter into this sort of tug of war mini game that's very poorly explained, and I found it very frustrating at the beginning because it wasn't really explained. I didn't know what I was doing, and I actually had to look it up, and finally I understood what I'm doing. But my whole thing, and the reason why I dislike it, is because I really feel like it takes away from the core gameplay where you're shooting and you're kind of platforming and you're moving. It feels like this very fluid combat, and then you kind of have to break it up by doing this tug of war minigame to extract these cores. I just feel like it breaks up the gameplay too much and kind of slows it down. It's like hitting bumps in the road instead of being a smooth, fluid combat system. There are times when you can instantly extract the cores from your enemies, and that's really fun. And if they would have just done that instead of this tug-of-war minigame, I think that would have been a lot better. Another thing I dislike about this game, and actually a lot of people have been talking about this in their reviews, are the long load times. Think Bloodborne here. This game takes forever to load, and I honestly don't know why. I mean, it's not like it's the most graphically intense game. It's not the most beautiful. It is a good-looking game, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere to where it's like Uncharted 4 level graphics. So I don't understand why it takes so long to load. And normally I don't complain about these types of things, but when you die and then you have to wait quite a while to just reload where you left your last checkpoint so you can try to get through that part, it's pretty annoying. The last item in my dislike column is that I've encountered some weird bugs playing through this game. There was one section where I skipped a cutscene because I'd already seen it, and all of a sudden textures were popping and things weren't loading right, and it was just really weird for a few moments. I've also had some weird dialogue things, some frame drops with a lot of enemies on the screen, and so there's just a lot of bugs that I've encountered, which leads me to the conclusion that this game is just not fully polished. And I'm waiting for them to kind of patch a few things so it'll be polished, but I really feel like this game could have done with a little bit longer time just to kind of polish out some of these little bugs that I'm encountering, because they're a little annoying. Overall, from what I've played of Recore, there's a lot of things to like here. The shooting and the combat I think is really fun. Like I said, the platforming is fantastic, and there's some story elements that really keep you going, and I'm really hoping get concluded as when I beat the game. However, on the other side, this game suffers from mediocrity, and I think that's probably the best way I can say it from what I've played, is that yes, it does some things so well, but there are other things that kind of just pull it back from being something great. And in conclusion, it suffers just from mediocrity. But that's not to say it's not fun. And for $40, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. And there you guys have it. Those are my impressions of Recore for the Xbox One. Let me know what you guys think about the game down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And until next time, I'm Bonfire, and I will see you online.
Yeah, now come up, it's shady you now. If you with me, put your hands up. On the fly, ladies, to the front, go ahead, stand up. Fellas, if you see the one you want, it's time to man up. Like, hey, oh, and if you see the